Hello everyone, yesterday Bungie announced some really drastic changes to swords in Destiny 2. They're basically being completely revamped starting next season. Now, like all things in Destiny, this ended up being somewhat controversial. I know, I'm just as surprised as you. I understand where the minority is coming from in this case, but I think in the grand scheme of things, these changes, if they are actually improvements and received well by most people, are worth sacrificing an unintended exploit for. I'll expand on what I mean after we cover the actual adjustments. The biggest way in which swords are being reshaped is that they will no longer function solely on ammo, which was always kind of a silly way to treat a melee weapon in the first place. While ammo is sticking around, we're seeing the addition of something called energy for swords. You'll have an energy bar that depletes when you use an ability that consumes energy, and then it's recharged naturally on its own, which sounds a lot like a stamina bar you'd see in any action RPG game, right? When you have a sword equipped, your melee ability is going to act as your energy bar, and you'll deplete that energy bar in a few different ways. First is by guarding. Guarding is now going to use energy instead of ammo. And now, different guards have different rates at which they consume energy. They'll have unique behaviors and unique damage resistances. So it's going to vary depending on which perk you go with. With these changes, you'll only need to have at least one ammo in your sword to begin guarding, and then you can guard using your energy. Some of you might remember that exotic called Stronghold from Season of the Drifter that allowed Titans infinite sword guarding. Bungie says that this exotic has also been modified to allow Titans to retain a unique guarding experience. So we'll have to test out exactly what's changed next season with Stronghold, but it doesn't look like it's being left behind to be useless. Heavy attacks now also consume sword energy instead of ammo. Regardless of how much energy you have left, you'll always be able to perform a heavy attack. However, it's going to do less damage compared to if your energy bar was full. It says here that as a general rule, aerial attacks do not consume energy, but that will vary based on the sword. And it looks like for light attacks, those will continue to use regular sword ammo like we're used to. A significant change here is that light attacks can now loop infinitely. You know how it's really annoying when you start spamming light attacks with a sword, and then you get 3 sword swipes in and your character just stops swinging for a brief moment? Now you'll just be able to keep chaining light attacks in one fluid combo. Oh, and now every type of sword also has the ability to cleave, which was previously only available to aggressive frame swords. And finally, a portion of most sword attacks can partially bypass elemental shields, giving them a little bit more personality. With sword perks and damage numbers also being modified, it's safe to say swords have seen a significant overhaul. This is a pretty big deal in a few ways. Mainly because this is really the biggest update to swords we've gotten since they were introduced in Destiny 1. And in Destiny 2, they've always felt like they've been lacking even with the ammo changes that eventually happened. Looking at just the few details we were given, these changes could start to wean more players off grenade launchers and light machine guns and open up an entirely new space for swords in the current meta, at least in PvE. We know swords will still take heavy ammo in PvP, but we don't know how that energy system or the new abilities and perks are going to factor into that yet. I'm pretty interested in this new potential of the guarding system. That could end up being a really great way to survive in high-level content, and if you've got a weapon like a sword that has infinite energy, you really don't have to worry about ammo nearly as much, and if we know anything about ammo in Destiny, anything that can bypass the ammo economy is typically really strong. As someone who deeply loves swords and the idea of melee weapons in Destiny and has since the Taken King, I've been waiting for the day Bungie does something more with them. They've experimented a little bit with the artifacts in Rise of Iron and then again with the class-specific swords in Destiny 2 Vanilla and with the exotic swords here and there, but there was never a push to make swords as a whole stand out. The exotic ones from Destiny 1 stood out the most because you had things like Dark Drinker having a huge area of attack and an incredibly satisfying animation, same with Boltcaster and its crazy range, and of course Razelighter, which was the first one I picked because of how cool it looked. Not to mention, those swords could hold a lot of ammo and were very, very strong. But outside of that, your typical sword didn't offer anything that couldn't be accomplished by a shotgun, and that's very much true today in Destiny 2. They may be able to hit hard, but they have a lot of risk and very little function outside of those risky maneuvers, and all swords and their perks just kind of feel the same and don't fully accomplish that fantasy of wielding a melee weapon. There is one sword in particular that can do something that no other sword can do though, and that's Worldline 0. I think it's pretty safe to call the skating maneuver a widely accepted exploit among both normal players and speedrunners at this point. Ever since it was discovered in Warmind, people have been using Worldline to zigzag and zip their way through content in record times, whether that be strikes or raids or just fooling around in patrol. And by the looks of it, it won't be nearly as efficient or maybe not even possible after these new sword changes. And this is where all the backlash comes from. As someone who enjoys speedrunning here and there and has incredible respect for those who have the skill to pull off these record times, I can understand how much this sucks to have the most useful tool in your arsenal be nerfed. And even for us normies who just like sword skating around for fun, it's going to be a bummer not to be able to fling ourselves 100 miles per hour at a wall anymore. With that said though, if these adjustments as a whole do end up giving swords a stronger identity, and they're all or mostly all positive changes that benefit the sandbox, whether that be having more diversity in loadouts or giving players a fresh new way to play, then I think it's totally worth it to sacrifice a single exploit for those positive changes. After all, one of the most common sentiments shared about this game is that it's not updated enough, that the sandbox just doesn't receive drastic changes frequently, and metas and playstyles stay the same for so long that they get really stale. Now you may ask, why couldn't they just have made these changes but left Worldline how it was? And that's a totally valid question, and we'll look to community manager DMG for that. He says in a tweet, like sticky nades, these strategies were growing in visibility and utility. Designing aspects of Destiny 2 around these strategies puts a hard limit on game design, whether it be activities or sword functionality. So in a similar way to the Lunafaction boot situation, allowing players to continue using the Worldline 0 in this manner was seemingly making it difficult to design certain aspects of the game. I'm not going to pretend to know what game design is like, but I imagine it's extremely frustrating even before having to account for an exploit that lets you travel hundreds of feet in just mere seconds. If this unintended functionality from Worldline was hurting other parts of the game or just making it difficult to build around it now that it's become so popular, I hope that the speedrunning community and even just people who like memeing with it can understand this even if they don't like or agree with the decision. Now I do agree with the complaint that Bungie did not give heads up soon enough. Bungie has always kind of been bad with sharing their development thoughts and plans, at least since the whole fiasco in year one when they brought out the dev roadmaps. Really wish they'd bring those back, by the way. And so I totally get why people thought the Worldline skating would stay forever. At no point in the last almost 2 years did Bungie ever pop in and say, hey, we're thinking about changes to Worldline skating in the future, just a heads up. They really just kind of let it sit for a while, and naturally people didn't think it would ever change. But do remember, this is a live service game and, nothing is sacred. To sum things up, I am pretty excited to test out swords. I think there's a lot of potential with how they're handling them, and you might see some wildly different strategies both in regular PvE meta or in speedrunning. People are very creative and will no doubt find some new crazy methods in no time. Also, I'm hoping that maybe we'll even get some special sword related mods on the artifact for Season 10. I would love if one of them gives me the ability to reflect projectiles again. I really miss being able to do that. So those are my thoughts on swords, and that's how they're changing in March. Bungie also has some plans for fusions and other things in the sandbox, which I'm sure we'll talk about soon. Check out my Discord channel in the description if you haven't already. I'm very active there and love chatting with you guys. And with that, thank you very much for watching.